In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the intake manifold on this Mazda 6. Let's install this TRQ intake. Let's remove the engine cover, pull up on it and set it aside. Let's loosen up this clamp that holds the air intake onto the air filter housing. Use a 10mm socket. You don't have to remove it, you just have to loosen it up so it releases pressure. Following this intake tube down, remove this hose and just twist it to the side. And there's another clamp over here. Same thing, 10mm socket. Loosen this one up as well. Now we should be able to pull on this and remove it. Whichever side is easiest, doesn't really matter. Pull it up like this. Take it off the throttle body. If you have to pry it off, just be very careful where you pry. You don't want to damage this. There we go, set that aside. Use an 8mm socket and remove the 4 bolts that hold the throttle body onto the intake. You can unplug it and disconnect this hose or remove the bolt if you want, but I'm just going to leave this attached to the vehicle and plugged in. I'll just push it to the side. With those removed, you can pull the intake right aside, just leave it here. With some pliers, pinch on this hose clamp, pull it off, and get the hose off of the intake. Sometimes these hoses get stuck, so it helps to give them a little twist. That'll break them free, but if you do this, make sure you don't twist it too much or crush it too much with the pliers so you don't break the hose. Once it breaks free, pull it aside. Let's remove this top one, pinch the clamp, pull it up, twist the hose, and remove it from the intake. There we go. Now let's release the retainers for the wiring harness, this main harness that runs across the top of the intake. There's one retainer over here. For this, you can just use a trim tool, or you can go on the back side and squish in on the 2 tabs that hold this retainer on. There's another one over here, same style. With this pried out, this harness won't move. It will still stay here, but at least we can get it off of the intake manifold. There's another retainer at the end here, and then if you follow this harness down, there's another one right here. Okay. On the right-hand side of the air intake, as you're looking at it from the front, you'll see the map sensor. Press on the tab with whatever you have here. I'm going to press on it with a pick just so I can reach it. Pull the connector down and disconnect it. I'm going to unbolt the map sensor and transfer it over once the intake is out. It'll be a lot easier. Looking behind that map sensor, you'll see some wires onto this retainer here. We'll have to pop the retainer off since it's clipped onto the air intake. Just pry it out of the way. Underneath the vehicle, you'll notice that on the main skid shield, there is a smaller one that allows you access to the underneath of the intake. So remove this 8mm screw, and with that off, you'll be able to pull this out. All right, now looking from underneath, you can see where the bottom bolt goes through the intake and onto the engine block. This is a 10mm headed bolt. We have to remove this one, and I'm going to remove it first. That way the rest of my work is going to be done from up top. Break it free and just remove it all the way. Once you break it free, you should be able to spin it off by hand. Take it out. Now while we're down here, let's unplug this retainer or disconnect the retainer for this wiring harness. There we go, set that aside. Following the harness further down, you'll see that there is one last retainer on this side. Down here we have to unclip it. Best way I found is to use a pick or a pocket screwdriver from the back side. Pry it out like that, and then unclip it from the bottom. There we go. Set it aside. Remove the hose that goes on the radiator from the overflow tank. Pry it out and pop it up. Do the same on this side. There we go. There's a wiring harness going through it, but if you tilt it like this, you should be able to remove it. Now we have 5 10mm headed bolts to unbolt from up top here. They go in a zigzag pattern at the top of the intake. I'm going to start with the 2 outer ones, then the 2 middle ones, and then the center one goes through here. Just break them free, one at a time, and then loosen up and remove all of them. Now with all of them broken free, remove them all. All the bolts are the same, no need to keep them separate. At this point, the intake is unbolted. However, there is one vacuum hose that's behind the intake underneath there. So as we pull this away, we'll have to undo that vacuum hose. Now wiggle the intake. It's probably going to be stuck on the head from the gaskets. Pull the wiring harness up and out of the way. Make sure it doesn't get caught on anything. And now we should be able to get this right out of here. Now there is that vacuum hose that's behind it, which we can reach right now, unplug it, and that will allow us to pull the rest of the intake right up and off. Use a T25 Torx bit and remove the bolt that holds the map sensor down. We have to transfer this over. Take that out and remove the map sensor carefully. There's an O-ring that sometimes gets it stuck in there. There it is. Reinstall the map sensor. Put on the bolt, snug it up. This is going into plastic, so you want to make sure you don't over tighten it. As soon as it bottoms out, just give it a little extra and that's it. Now let's scrape off the intake ports with a razor blade or anything that you have that is gentle enough not to dig up this surface. This is aluminum, so it's fairly soft. You want to get off all of this debris, any corrosion that you might have, and carbon buildup. Doesn't have to look perfect. Make sure you don't get any debris in the runners, intake runners here. If you think you might get some in there, stuff a rag in there, but obviously don't forget it in there. That would be a bad day. You want to make sure you do this to all of the ports. Clean everything off. Take some brake parts cleaner on a clean rag and just wipe everything off. Make sure the surface is degreased and free of any debris that would prevent the gaskets from sealing up. With our mating surface clean, we can now install the air intake back in. Make sure you don't get any wires caught on the gaskets. You don't want those to break. And before you actually put it on all the way, make sure you put the vacuum hose or the PCV hose down here back onto the intake port. It'll be a lot easier to do it now rather than later. Still can't see it very well, but try to line it up. All right, there we go. That's installed. And now you want to bring the intake closer to the head. Get the wiring harness over all of these retainer clips. Make sure these hoses don't get pinched in there, throttle body, all of that. That is perfectly lined up right here. So let's start in the bolts. I'm going to focus on all of the top bolts first. I'm going to leave the bottom one for last. I'm even going to torque these first, then I'll do that one because these are the important ones. That is just a support. You want the intake runners to be fully equally seated up against the head first. Doesn't matter which ones you start first when it comes to just starting them on. Just whatever is easiest so it can stay on here. But I will torque them in a sequence, of course. Okay, they're all started. So I'm going to start by snugging up the center one and then going in a cross pattern to the outer ones. let's torque them. The torque for these bolts is going to be 13 foot-pounds. You're going to want to start in the center and work your way in a cross pattern towards the outer ones. Let's double check them all. This time I'm just going to go down the line. All right, those are all tight. Now let's install the mounting bolts through the bottom. Snug it up. The torque for this is also 13 foot-pounds. However, I can't fit a torque wrench in here. So I'm just going to get a longer ratchet, put some leverage on it, and snug it up. That's pretty tight right there. Install the cover and put the bolt back in. Snug it up. Let's re-secure the wire with all of the retainers, starting from one side, working our way towards the other side. Make sure that when you lock them in, they click, so that the wire can be properly secured. Follow the harness, clip it in wherever else it needs to be clipped in if you unclipped anything else. Clip the wiring harness down underneath the map sensor, and then while we're here, plug in the map sensor. Let's get these hoses reseated on the intake. Make sure they go down all the way. Let's get the hose clamps back over. I like to put them back in the same position that they came off of, or at least very close, because the hose kind of molds to the clamp, so it helps it seal up better. There we go. Let's reattach the throttle body. I'm going to start in this one bolt so I can get it centered up. Once this one's started, start in your other ones. There are 4 8mm headed bolts in total. I'm going to snug these all up, going in a cross pattern. Of course, I will torque them, so with my air ratchet, I'm not going to go very tight. The torque for these is 90 inch-pounds. We're going to go in a cross pattern to make sure that gasket gets squished down evenly. If you are unable to torque these at such a low torque, just make them nice and snug about a quarter turn after they bottom out. Double check them. All right, let's reinstall the intake snorkel. Let's reinstall the intake snorkel. Make sure you don't put it on backwards. It won't actually fit if you try to. This side is bigger than this one. And you want to make sure that it seats all the way. A lot of times this lip folds in if you don't put it on right, and then it won't seal up. Now, let's tighten up these 2 clamps, 10mm socket. When you tighten these, you don't want to over tighten them. You want to just squish them a little bit. As soon as it starts squishing on it, if you can still spin it, tighten it a little more. That's tight right there. I can't spin it anymore. Do the same to this one. That's it. Don't forget about this PCV hose. Reconnect that. Let's slide the overflow tank back down. Make sure this wiring harness is out of the way. And once it gets seated in here, it's going to have to click into place to lock in, so tap it on both ends. You should not be able to easily pull it back out. Also, make sure it's flush on the bottom, and then reconnect the hose to the radiator. And there you go. Reinstall your engine cover, line it up with the oil fill cap of the dipstick and of course the 4 pins. Press it on, make sure it's secured. Turn on the engine, make sure it runs right, and there you have it. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.